I was standing in the bridal suite wearing my dream wedding dress just 30 minutes before walking down the aisle to marry the man I thought was my soulmate. Through the thin walls, I could hear voices from the adjoining room where my fiance James was getting ready with his groomsmen. Then I heard his mother's voice clearly. Thank God we found a way to get rid of her family. Poor people like that would ruin our reputation. My heart stopped as I realized they were talking about my family, the people who had raised me with love and integrity. Before I tell you how I walked away from my dream wedding and never looked back, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from and hit that like button if you have ever discovered someone's true colors at the worst possible moment. What I heard next will make you understand why I had no choice but to run. Let me take you back to how this all began so you understand exactly what was at stake when I made the most important decision of my life. My name is Genevieve, and I am a 29-year-old nurse practitioner working in the pediatric ward at Children's Memorial Hospital. I built my career from nothing growing up in a working-class family where my father worked as a mechanic and my mother taught elementary school. We lived in a modest neighborhood where neighbors knew each other's names and helped during tough times. I earned a full scholarship to nursing school, worked multiple jobs to pay for my education, and climbed my way up to become one of the youngest nurse practitioners in my department. My parents taught me that hard work, integrity, and treating people with respect were the most important values in life. Money could not buy character, and character was what mattered most when evaluating someone's worth. That philosophy was tested when I met James Wellington III at a hospital charity gala last year. He was a pediatric surgeon, charming and handsome, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. James came from old money, the kind of family whose name was on buildings around the city because of their real estate empire spanning 3 generations. Our courtship was like something from a romantic movie. James sent flowers to the hospital every Friday, took me to expensive restaurants I had only dreamed of visiting, and planned weekend getaways to places I had seen in magazines but never imagined experiencing. He made me feel like a princess, constantly telling me how refreshing it was to meet someone real and down to earth compared to the socialites in his usual circle. When James introduced me to his family, the differences between our worlds became impossible to ignore. The Wellington family lived in a mansion in the most exclusive part of town, complete with staff and a lifestyle that seemed more like television than reality. Margaret Wellington, his mother, was polite but cold during our first meeting, making subtle comments about how nice it was that I helped children in a tone that made my profession sound like volunteer work rather than a medical career. Charles Wellington, James's father, barely acknowledged my presence during family dinners, directing most of his conversation toward James while treating me like furniture in the room. Catherine Wellington, James's sister, was outright hostile from day one, asking pointed questions about my intentions and making it clear she thought I was after their money. The red flags were everywhere, but I was so caught up in the fairy tale romance that I ignored them all. When his family made condescending remarks about my background, James would later apologize for them privately, but never defended me in the moment. He always had excuses: they just need time to warm up to you, or they are not used to meeting people from different backgrounds. I told myself that love would conquer all, and eventually his family would see what James saw in me. During our engagement, I noticed that James and I moved in completely separate social circles. I was never invited to Wellington family events or their exclusive country club gatherings. When I mentioned feeling left out, James would say things like, "Those events are boring anyway," or "You would not enjoy those stuffy old people." I accepted these explanations because I wanted to believe that James was protecting me from his family's snobbery, not enabling it. The wedding planning process became a nightmare from the very beginning. Margaret Wellington took over every decision without consulting me, from the venue to the flowers to the menu. When I tried to have input, she would smile sweetly and say things like, "Trust me, dear, I know what works best for our kind of wedding." The venue she chose was their exclusive country club, a place where I had never felt comfortable and which reflected none of my personal taste or style. 2 weeks before the wedding, the first major crisis hit when Margaret Wellington called to discuss seating arrangements. I expected this to be a simple conversation about making sure elderly relatives had accessible seating, but what she told me left me speechless. Out of 200 wedding guests, only 10 seats had been allocated for my entire family. Space is limited, and we have so many important people to accommodate, Margaret explained in her saccharine voice. I am sure your family will understand that sacrifices had to be made for the greater good of the celebration. When I brought this up with James, his response was even more devastating than his mother's original request. It is just one day, and we need to keep my parents happy, he said dismissively. Your family is more down to earth than mine. They will understand that this is about appearances and business relationships for my father's company. This was our first major fight, and I felt like a second-class citizen in my own wedding planning. James could not understand why I was upset about what he called logistics, while I felt like my loved ones were being treated as an embarrassment to be hidden away. The bachelor and bachelorette party situation made things even worse. The Wellington family hosted James's bachelor party at an exclusive resort in the mountains, a 3-day affair with his college friends and family members. I was not invited to any Wellington family wedding events, not even the bridal shower that Margaret hosted for her friends and female relatives. My own bachelorette party was a simple dinner with my nursing colleagues, a modest celebration that felt appropriate for my budget and style. The dress shopping experience became another source of tension when Margaret insisted on accompanying me to the final fitting. She made comments about the dress being appropriate for someone of my background and offered passive-aggressive suggestions about understated elegance that translated to making sure I did not outshine anyone in the Wellington family photos. The rehearsal dinner at the Wellington family estate was when I really started to panic. My family had barely been invited, and when they arrived, they were clearly uncomfortable in the opulent surroundings. Margaret's speech included subtle digs about different worlds coming together, while Catherine's toast mentioned how James has always been charitable with his time. Most insulting of all, my father was pulled aside and told to keep his speech short and simple because the evening was running long. The day before the wedding, my family was feeling so unwelcome that my mother suggested maybe we should postpone the celebration. Something feels wrong, honey, she told me privately. This does not feel like a joining of families. It feels like we are being tolerated at best. When I brought up my family's concerns with James, he dismissed them as being too sensitive and said we just needed to get through the wedding day and then everything would settle down. On the morning of the wedding, I arrived early to find that my family's table had been moved even further toward the back of the reception area. When I questioned this, the Wellington family's event coordinator claimed they needed space for the photography area and that the change was temporary. I also discovered that my mother had been relegated to helping in the kitchen without anyone asking her simply because one of the staff members assumed she was part of the catering team. The final red flag came when I overheard James on the phone with one of his groomsmen saying, "Just get through today, then things will be different." When I asked him what he meant, he claimed it was about work stress and that he was anxious about taking time off for our honeymoon. Something in his tone told me there was more to the story, but I was too focused on getting ready for the ceremony to investigate further. Standing in the bridal suite 30 minutes before the ceremony, I was putting the final touches on my makeup when I heard voices coming from the adjoining room where James was getting ready. The walls were thinner than I had realized, and I could hear every word of the conversation happening on the other side. Margaret's voice came through clearly. "I cannot believe we actually pulled this off." Catherine responded with obvious satisfaction, telling her family the reception time was an hour later was genius. Then I heard Charles Wellington add, "They will arrive just as we are finishing the important photos." My heart started pounding as I realized what they were discussing, but the worst was yet to come. James's voice joined the conversation. It was the only way to keep them from embarrassing us in front of everyone. The full scope of their deception became clear as I continued listening. My family had been deliberately misinformed about the timing of various wedding events. The formal photos were being taken early, with only the Wellington family and their important guests, ensuring that my loved ones would not be included in the official wedding album. The reception timeline had been manipulated to minimize my family's presence during the most significant moments of the celebration. But the conversation grew even more devastating as it continued. Margaret said, "Once they are married, we can gradually phase her family out of their social life." Catherine added, "James can always claim work obligations to skip their family gatherings." Charles contributed his own cruel observation, "The prenup will ensure she gets nothing if this marriage does not work out." Then James delivered the final blow, "She has no idea about the prenup modifications we made yesterday." As I stood there in my wedding dress, listening to the people I was about to call family discuss their systematic plan to exclude and manipulate my loved ones, the reality of my situation crashed down on me. This entire relationship had been built on deception and class prejudice. James had never intended to truly integrate our families or respect the people who had shaped me into the woman he claimed to love. The modified prenup meant I was being married under false pretenses, with legal documents that had been changed without my knowledge or consent. My family had been systematically excluded and humiliated, not by accident or oversight, but as part of a deliberate strategy to minimize their presence in my new life. I quietly called my maid of honor, Sarah, and whispered urgently, "I need you to get my family out of here immediately." When she asked what was wrong, I quickly explained what I had overheard and asked her to help them leave before the ceremony began. I could not let them sit through a wedding where they were unwanted and had been deliberately deceived about their role in the celebration. Looking at myself in the mirror, wearing a dress chosen to please his family rather than express my own style, I remembered my father's worried face at the rehearsal dinner and my mother's intuition that something was wrong. I realized that marrying James would mean betraying everything my parents had taught me about integrity, respect, and standing up for the people you love. I sent a text message to the wedding coordinator, "Stop everything, wedding is canceled." Within minutes, chaos erupted outside the bridal suite as the coordinator made the announcement that the ceremony was postponed due to an emergency. I quickly changed into the street clothes I had brought for after the reception, while James pounded on the door, demanding to know what was happening. When James finally entered the bridal suite, his face showed confusion and anger rather than concern. I calmly explained exactly what I had overheard, including every detail about the deliberate exclusion of my family and the prenup modifications made without my knowledge. James tried to do damage control, claiming I had misunderstood and that they were all just nervous about the wedding. But when I pressed him for details, his true colors finally emerged. "My family has standards and compromises had to be made," he said, no longer bothering to hide his condescension. "You know this marriage would require adjustments from both sides." In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was making the right decision. The man I thought I loved had shown me exactly who he really was, and it was not someone I could spend my life with. The immediate aftermath of canceling the wedding was brutal but liberating. The Wellington family was furious about being embarrassed in front of 200 guests, many of whom were important business and social connections. Vendors were demanding payment despite the last-minute cancellation, and social media speculation began almost immediately about what could have caused such a dramatic turn of events. But my family rallied around me with complete support. Once they understood what had happened, my father told me he was proud of my courage, and my mother admitted they had never trusted the Wellington family's intentions. "I was ready to punch Charles when he talked down to your mother," my father confessed. "We supported you because you seemed happy, but we were terrified this was how the rest of your life would look." During the first week after the canceled wedding, James made multiple attempts at reconciliation, sending flowers and showing up at my apartment with elaborate apologies. "We can work this out and plan a smaller wedding," he pleaded. "My family will come around once they get used to the idea." But I had heard their true feelings in that conversation, and I knew that respect and acceptance could not be forced or negotiated. My firm response was simple: there is no "we" anymore. James had shown me that his loyalty would always belong to his family's prejudices rather than to our partnership, and I refused to spend my life fighting for basic respect from people who saw me as beneath them. The legal disentanglement process revealed even more disturbing truths. When I returned the 3-carat Wellington family engagement ring, I discovered that the prenup modifications would have left me with nothing in case of divorce, despite James's promises that the document was just a formality to protect both of our interests. I had to cancel shared credit cards and joint accounts that James had opened during our engagement, many of which I had not fully understood were in both of our names. I worried initially that the scandal might affect my professional reputation, especially since James worked at the same hospital system, but my colleagues were overwhelmingly supportive once they understood what had happened. Most of them had sensed something was off about James's family during hospital social events, and several admitted they were relieved I had found the strength to walk away. 6 months after the wedding cancellation, I learned that James had gotten engaged to someone from a similar social background within 4 months of our breakup. This news confirmed what I had suspected all along. I had been an experiment in marrying down, and when that experiment became too complicated, he quickly found someone more suitable to his family's standards. Rather than feeling heartbroken about his quick replacement, I felt only relief. The speed of his new engagement proved that our relationship had never been as deep or meaningful as I had believed. I had been a placeholder while he figured out what his family would accept, not a true partner he was willing to fight for. My career flourished in ways I had never expected. I was promoted to head nurse practitioner in the pediatric ward, a position that came with increased responsibility and financial independence. I bought my own condo in a neighborhood I loved, not the prestigious area James had preferred, but a place where I felt comfortable and could afford without stretching my budget. I also renewed friendships that had been neglected during my relationship with James. Many of my nursing school friends admitted they had felt unwelcome around James and his social circle, and I realized how much I had isolated myself trying to fit into his world. Reconnecting with people who knew and valued the real me was like coming home after a long, uncomfortable journey. 1 year later, I met someone who changed my entire understanding of what a healthy relationship should look like. David was a teacher at my mother's school, and when he met my family, he genuinely enjoyed spending time with them. He attended my father's backyard barbecues, with enthusiasm helped my mother with her classroom projects, and treated my parents with the respect they deserved. The difference was remarkable. Where James had made excuses for his family's behavior and asked me to understand their standards, David actively defended me and made sure I felt valued in every situation. His family welcomed me immediately, and our mothers became close friends within months of us dating. 2 years after walking away from the Wellington family wedding, I was planning another celebration, but this time with full family integration and mutual respect. David's proposal was simple but meaningful, taking place in my parents' backyard with both families present to celebrate our engagement. The experience taught me invaluable lessons about recognizing red flags in relationships and understanding the difference between love and manipulation. Real love does not require you to minimize yourself or hide important parts of your identity. The right partner will be proud to introduce you to everyone in their life and will defend you when others treat you poorly. I learned to trust actions over words, especially when they contradict each other repeatedly. James had said all the right things about loving me for who I was, but his actions consistently showed that he was trying to change me into someone more acceptable to his social circle. Most importantly, I discovered that true partnership means both families becoming one, not creating a hierarchy where one side has to earn acceptance from the other. When someone shows you who they are through their treatment of the people you love, believe them the first time rather than making excuses or hoping they will change. Looking back, I realized that overhearing that conversation was not the worst thing that could have happened to me, but the best. It saved me from a lifetime of feeling like an outsider in my own marriage and gave me the courage to find someone who celebrates my background rather than hiding it. Sometimes the most devastating moments in our lives turn out to be the greatest gifts we could receive. That conversation I overheard did not ruin my wedding day. It saved my entire life. Because I learned that day that you should never have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's world. The right person will expand their world to include all of you. Have you ever discovered someone's true feelings at the worst possible moment, and how did you handle it? What would you have done in my situation when faced with choosing between love and self-respect? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below because I know many of you have faced similar moments of truth in your own relationships. Hit that like button if this story reminded you to trust your instincts even when your heart wants to ignore the red flags. Subscribe for more real stories about finding the courage to walk away from situations that do not serve you, even when it means giving up something you thought you wanted. Please share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve a partner who loves and respects their entire family, not just the parts that are convenient or socially acceptable. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that the right person will never ask you to choose between them and the people who made you who you are. I wish you all the courage to demand the love and respect you deserve and the wisdom to recognize when someone is not capable of giving it to you.